The entire country was mourning and kissing his portraits. On March the 9th, 1953, the Soviet Union was paying its last tribute to Joseph Stalin. On that day, hundreds of people were killed in the crowd, making their way to the deceased leader. And no one knew that the body in the coffin was not worth the sacrifice. The corpse wasn't that of Stalin. Sensational details of the death of the Kremlin's master. It is not Stalin who's been buried near the Kremlin Wall. The real leader had died before his official date of death. The secret life of the Soviet dictator. How many doubles did Joseph Stalin have? It seemed that Stalin visited different occasions with
different ears.
Who had prepared them and why? And what fate awaited the directors of this performance? People who were directly related to Stalin's doubles were shot. We will conduct our own investigation and find unique evidence. We will analyze the newsreels from those times. With the help of experts, we will determine how to distinguish the fake leader from the real one. If you take these two pictures, you can see that the ears belong to totally different people. And most importantly, we will find out what really happened to Joseph Stalin. December 31st, 1939. The Kremlin guards didn't like New Year celebrations because of the crowds that gathered outside the door. Suddenly, the crowd parted to allow the Kremlin master to make his way through. The usual slight smile on his face. The guards saluted. Everything went according to plan. Nobody could have guessed the surprise that awaited them. A moment later, through the same doors, another Stalin would enter. This incident is described in a book by a man named Sergei Krasikov. The guard who was on duty that night in the Kremlin. But what was it? A ghost or a hoax? That's how they tried to explain it to the frightened guard. Along with Comrade Stalin, there came a heavily made-up actor, Gelovani, to the Kremlin. However, the guards knew the actor was at least a head taller than Stalin. It turns out, Stalin really did have doubles. But when exactly had they appeared? Ears are a unique part of the human body. People may be similar in many ways, but no two pairs of ears are alike. It is on this basis we'll try to find out the truth. Here are some pictures of the leader. They were taken over the period of a year, but in different places. We will show these pictures to a specialist. Ukrainian expert criminologist Andrei Dubovik has agreed to help us by examining 6 different portraits of Joseph Stalin. Right now, he will determine how similar they are. Auricle, retina, and fingerprints are totally unique features that can never be repeated. Visually, you can determine if a person is very similar. The eyes, nose, or ears. But somewhere there will be a difference. So we are starting the experiment. Andrei takes photos and examines them. The first conclusions of the expert are really amazing. Here on this photo, we can see the ear of the owner, regular oval shape. If we look at another picture, Here, the ear is completely stretched out in an elongated shape, completely different. You can clearly see it when we zoom in on the photo. The ears belong to totally different people. This is surprising, but it turns out that in these particular photographs, there are two completely different people. According to experts, this is the first time the double rather than the leader was captured on newsreel. This is the parade of 1935, which was led not by Stalin, but by his double. Documents confirm that Stalin had doubles. This is completely accurate. Anyway, with the help of documents, I can confirm in a few minutes that there were such people. But why did Stalin need doubles? 1933, Abkhazia, Lake Ritsa. Stalin was having a rest. He always liked water trips. He also liked this quiet and unobtrusive Mingrelian who accompanied him everywhere. Deputy head of the Georgian NKVD, Lavrenti Beria, always subtly felt Stalin's mood. Not wanting to disturb the leader's thoughts, he stood aside. The boat was slowly approaching a wooded bank. But suddenly, something unbelievable happened. Suddenly, a body fell on top of Stalin. It was Beria who shielded the leader from fatal bullets. Who was shooting? The trembling Stalin didn't even think about it. He was too afraid to move. He could only think of one thing. If it hadn't been for Beria, he would be lying dead in the boat. But Stalin didn't realize that Beria himself had organized the attempted murder. It was just a show for one spectator, but with very clear goals. So with this attempted murder, Beria killed two birds with one stone. After the incident, he became a trusted associate of Stalin, and more importantly, he managed to convince the leader that from that moment on, his life was in constant danger. And only he, Beria, knew best how to protect the Kremlin master. Stalin was encouraged by Beria to create doubles as a form of protection for himself. A provocation was organized by Beria. It seemed to be an attack on Stalin. Beria needs to scare Stalin, make him believe that there were constant enemies who must be destroyed. 1934, suburbs of Moscow. For the third hour, Christopher was lying lost in conjectures. Who are these people that took him away in the middle of the working day? Put him in a car and took him somewhere. What did he do wrong? What did they want from him? People silently checked his eyes with a light and felt his chin. They sprinkled his face with something. Christopher felt unbearable pain. It felt as though his skin was burning. Now he had the same smallpox scars as his leader. He woke up in unbearable pain. His face was burning. What did they do to him? He was even more shocked when he looked in the mirror. Looking back at him, was Joseph Stalin. Only the man's scared eyes were different from Stalin's. A few hours later, a nurse came to the ward to check Christopher's condition, but he did not react. He could only think of one thing: to escape, to save himself, and forget the terrible nightmare. Suddenly, it dawned upon him. He threw himself at the girl's feet and asked her to send a note to inform his family about where he was and what had happened to him. Christopher did not realize his family were already dead. And no one could help him. Your name? Christopher. His old life had ended, and a new one had started. Your name? Christopher. Full of humiliation and fear. He had to learn how to talk and walk and smoke a pipe and keep his left arm motionless. In this studio was a special director who taught him Stalin's intonations, gestures. This was obligatory. There was a director, perhaps not the only one, who could teach gestures, voice, intonation and behavior, the way he holds his hands and so on. Soon he was standing on the mausoleum, greeting demonstrations and parades. As far as his colleagues were concerned, this man died in a car accident along with all his family. His name disappeared from all documents for good. As with the documents went his entire existence. However, the truth would still come out. The directors of the show had made a huge mistake. Outsiders learned about the existence of Stalin No. 2. In the Politburo, rumors were being spread. The leader had been replaced. Gossips were soon arrested. However, the truth came out. Many years later, this story was described in a book by Stalin's former bodyguard, Sergei Krasikov. He even mentioned the full name of the double: Christopher Goldstab. Christopher, who would soon become well known. On December 6, 1934, Moscow was paying its last respects to the first secretary of the Leningrad Regional Party Committee and Stalin's favorite, Sergei Kirov. Here's a video. We can clearly see in the newsreel, along with Molotov and Budyonny, the coffin is being followed by the leader himself, or so everybody thought. And only a few knew. In fact, it was the debut of Stalin's new double, Christopher Goldstab. Behind the coffin walked a silent man. In mine and other historians' opinion, this was Stalin's first double, the silent one. He had a lot of silent doubles, unlike Stalin himself. 1935, suburbs of Moscow. Yevsey felt he was in seventh heaven. A simple accountant from Vinnytsia Oblast, he had dreamt of becoming an actor since his childhood. And now it seemed his dream was coming true. For the last 6 months, he worked with a whole crew of doctors, cosmetologists, directors, and actors. They only wanted one thing from him: to impersonate Joseph Stalin. And here he triumphed. He has become a true replica of the leader. The door opened. The main performer had arrived. A short man in a pince nez. The man who had brought Yevsey here. Lubitsky's heart started to beat loudly. The snake-like look of Comrade Beria seemed to penetrate him. But the double coped and didn't look away. Now remained the most important thing of all, to please Comrade Stalin. It was the rule. The master of the country always checked his doubles personally. An hour later, they had to meet in the Kremlin. The former accountant was feeling confident. People who were directly related to Stalin's doubles were shot so as not to leave any trace. Beria knew how to cover his tracks. Therefore, he sentenced to death all the performers of the doubles transformation and to kill Lubitsky's family to keep it secret. Yevsey himself survived. In the 80s, he told his story to a Montreal newspaper. But to survive, he needed a miracle. Stalin was examining the double with contempt. Although they were identical, the leader could not deal with his background. This man was a Jew. And the ambitious Stalin could not stand it. It seemed that the decision had already been made. Let Beria liquidate this material. At first, Stalin didn't notice little Svetlana entering the room. She threw herself into the arms of the leader. A moment later, she saw her real father. It was a triumph. And Yevsey realized he had been approved and would therefore live. He interviewed some of the doubles. He had the power to say yes or no. And he loved his Lubitsky. He was a gentle, quiet man. Stalin was right. Lubitsky was a really talented actor. While Golshtab stood in the distance on the mausoleum, Lubitsky met with ambassadors and even members of the Kremlin. It entertained Stalin. He even watched these meetings through a special lens. Most of all, he enjoyed it when his subordinates abased themselves in front of his double. It made him feel euphoric. However, this was merely entertainment. The true role of Stalin's doubles remained the same. They were targets. Watch later. Amazing details of the leader's death. The real Joseph Stalin was killed a month before the official date of his death. And for a few weeks, the country was ruled by his double. Unique evidence of Soviet medics. At the Kremlin Wall is buried a copy of the leader. The last mystery of Lavrenti Beria. Former head of the NKVD was shot on the day of his arrest in his private cabinet. The inquiry over Beria's double lasted 6 months. November the 6th, 1942. Moscow. The guards were tense. A car approached the front door of the Kremlin. A moment later, the master got into it. The car hadn't even made it through the gate when shots were heard. Terrified guards rushed to rescue the leader. But when they saw him, they were shocked. Stalin was covered in blood, with no signs of life. This was described by several security guards. But how surprised they must have been when the next morning they saw Stalin alive and well again. He came out of the Kremlin as if nothing had happened. But how did he manage to survive? It was a well-organized system. Every time a double came out of the front door and got into a car, Stalin would leave from the back door and drive in a different direction. This scheme never failed. On the day of the attack on the double, they managed to warn Stalin of the danger, and he simply did not leave the Kremlin. The leader appeared in front of the guards the following morning. In order to explain his remarkable recovery, he ordered a statement claiming no one died in the attack. Stalin standing on the mausoleum, Stalin in a car on the street, Stalin in the crowd. In the midst of the war, he appeared everywhere, as if signaling the leader is with his people. When they began comparing all the portraits and photographs, it appeared that Stalin had
different ears.
This suggested that Stalin did indeed have doubles. And it was they who were hunted by the German intelligence, the Japanese Secret Service, and the saboteurs. The KGB had been instructed to look for people similar to Stalin. They say there were 14 doubles. The system worked perfectly. During the war, there were more than 20 attempted murders. How many of them succeeded remains a mystery. But one thing is sure, the real leader survived them all. Stalin appreciated Beria's idea. The doubles were being looked for throughout the entire country, in factories and villages, but mostly on the front line. Relatives were sent a killed in battle notice. They were none the wiser and had no idea that their relative had begun a completely new and different life. Each of them had to learn how to move, behave, or even talk like Stalin. Although the lookalikes were allowed to look people in the eye and shake hands, under no circumstances were they to make speeches. And the doubles performed their roles perfectly. They were masters at parades and dinners. And they would even sit in at meetings of the Politburo when Stalin was ill. The quote from the history of Stalin's illness, 1947, quote, "The beginning, March 26, Joseph Stalin has got diarrhea. By the evening, he felt feverish. He feels generally indisposed. At 7, the temperature was 38.5 degrees. You may ask, but what does this have to do with Stalin's doubles? The answer is simple. Meanwhile, according to all the world newspapers, Stalin welcomes delegations, sits at the largest meetings. Beria, Malenkov, Voroshilov are sitting on the panel in the foreground. But for some reason, he is behind. Because it is a double, and he isn't allowed to listen to what the first people in the country say. However, there were some incidents. It was at the time of Stalin's illness when a delegation from the United States arrived in Moscow. It was too late to cancel it. If the leader hadn't shown up, it would have been disrespectful to the foreign guests. But Stalin, who at that time was lying in bed with high fever, could not come. The leader was promised that it would be merely a ceremonial meeting. And Stalin decided to take a risk and send his double. Stalin had said things that the Americans simply had to publish and say that it was not clear how to explain this to the people. Our side had no choice but to publish their own version of this meeting and say that the Americans didn't understand it correctly. Stalin was speaking in Russian, so they couldn't understand and translate everything. It was a double. No matter how hard this double tried, he said something wrong. But even after that incident, the leader had retained the services of his doubles. They were a perfect weapon that saved him from death and were helpful during any illness. But there was one thing Stalin had overlooked. Very soon, this weapon would shoot back at him, and the trigger would be pulled by a man who once had raised the cock. March 1st, 1953. Suburbs of Moscow. That night, there were guests at the dacha. The leader's closest and most trusted circle. Beria, Malenkov, Bulganin, and Khrushchev. For a long time, they sat talking about business. They dispersed at 5 in the morning. The guards felt relieved. Now they could rest. However, they knew that no matter how long a party continued, at 8 a.m., Stalin would already be on his feet. But this morning was different. At 9 a.m., he was still in his bedroom. Maybe Stalin had decided to have a lie-in. By 10 a.m., the guards were beginning to worry. Maybe something had happened. But how to check? How to enter the room? The door to the leader's room is a no-go area for outsiders. Anyone who opened it at the wrong time risked their life. Only after a specific sound could a person enter. Half an hour later, mail was delivered. The package was to be immediately given to Stalin. Who was to hand it over? It was decided that the job should go to Deputy Superintendent Pyotr Lozgachev. Stalin liked him. There was a chance that the man would not be punished. Lozgachev quietly opened the door. Stalin was not moving. A moment later, the house was in turmoil. They called the Kremlin. Stalin was put in bed and covered up. But then, strange things started to happen. According to Nikita Khrushchev, they were informed of Stalin's strange disease on March the 2nd at 9 a.m. He and Beria came to the dacha and called the doctors. They didn't leave the leader for a moment. But Lozgachev assures us that everything happened in a completely different way, and Stalin was found a day earlier. Beria allowed doctors to enter the house the next morning. X-ray, cardiogram, injections. All were made quickly and accurately. Procedures were recorded in a book, as well as a description of the patient, including any bruises and scratches. Did these people know that soon they would cause a revolution? They were about to discover that it was not Stalin whom they had treated. Record book of Stalin's doctors. For many years, this document was kept in the archives as classified information. But now it became available and totally changed the idea of the last days of Stalin. Medics recorded everything, even the appearance of their patient. And it turns out that this patient was not Stalin, but his double. The true leader of the Soviet Union had many physical defects. The second and third toes on his left foot were fused at birth. Leg muscles were of different thicknesses. His left hand was paralyzed, which is why he always kept it bent or hidden behind his back. But they found no such defects on the patient who died in the dacha. It's incredible, but according to the records, the patient had a completely normal body structure. On his feet, the big toenail is not cut. Nothing about the fused toes. Nothing about deformed hand during the autopsy. They described a completely different body, which indicates that it must have been a double. Thus, it wasn't Stalin, but a double. The man who replaced the leader on his deathbed. But what happened to the real Stalin? It's hard to believe, but experts say the leader died a month before his official date of death. And it was the head of Cheka, Lavrenti Beria, who took care of this. And where was the real Stalin? I do not know what Beria could have done with him, but one day he proudly announced, "I removed him." But how could this happen? What made Beria take this step? As it turned out, it was Stalin himself. The leader was afraid of power and authority, which the former Cheka officer had. Beria was becoming too dangerous, and Stalin decided to act. The leader ordered to collect compromising material on him, which over time could be used in court. This decision became fatal for the leader. Beria realized he could wait no longer. We have found evidence from Stalin's daughter Svetlana Alliluyeva. Here is what she wrote about the last few weeks of the leader's life. "My father has changed a lot. Usually he is pale. Now he has a red face. He is not talking to me, and it seems doesn't even know. What does this strange evidence mean?" Can it be that Svetlana Alliluyeva was describing her father's double? Where then has the real Stalin gone? Experts suggest Beria had got rid of the leader earlier and replaced the dead Stalin with a fake. It was a triumph. Now the double was Beria's puppet, and he could not stop him on his way to limitless power. But Beria overlooked one thing. Stalin's closest circle, Khrushchev and Malenkov, had already prepared a plan to assassinate the leader. They didn't know about the substitution. Therefore, Beria was accused of being an accomplice or an enemy. Beria could not risk his life when his dream was so close. And the former head of the Cheka could do nothing but kill Stalin for the second time. On March the 5th, 1953, in Moscow, an important event took place. Joint meeting of the Politburo, the government of the Soviet Union, and the Supreme Soviet. By a unanimous vote, Comrade Beria was given full power. The other members of the four hadn't been forgotten. All of them got key positions. Exactly 1 hour after the meeting, the death of Joseph Stalin was announced. Beria was jubilant. His plan had worked. He managed to fool everyone, including Stalin and his former associates. The way to the throne was free. But one thing he didn't realize: not everyone would accept his plans. Former friends did not want to obey Beria. They knew that after his rise to power, things would be even worse than under Stalin's reign, and they already knew what to do. To use the same simple and reliable method: the doubles. The gun that had killed Stalin now had to be used against Beria. June 26, 1953, Moscow. He was sitting in his cabinet, carefully looking at some papers. Beria was preparing for the next meeting of the Politburo when the doors of his cabinet opened. In walked some military men armed with weapons. Beria rushed to the briefcase, where there was a loaded pistol. But he had no time to do anything. For the next 6 months, a prison cell deep underground in a bomb shelter would become his home. And his daily duties would include attending the court hearings. Beria would be tried as a traitor to the state, a murderer and a pervert. They would remember everything: mass executions and child rape. In 1953, the entire country would learn of his crimes. However, they weren't allowed to see the criminal. The process would take place behind closed doors. But why? Because it was only a show, hastily prepared and not of high quality. November 1953, Moscow. On that day, as was traditional at the Kremlin, they were listening to the radio. From there, they heard voices of prosecutors and plenty of charges. Scandalous details of the life of the most influential man of the Union. And now, a simple defendant, Lavrenti Beria. But one thing surprised the Kremlin staff. Why were only a few allowed to witness the process? Why wasn't he being photographed? Soon, all the Kremlin would be gossiping about it. Defendant Lavrenti Beria would turn out not to be Lavrenti Beria at all. It happened at one of the hearings. On that day, they decided to question the witness, a man whose wife Beria had raped and murdered. The witness was a Mingrelian, that is, he belonged to the same nation as Beria. In anger, he suddenly spoke to the prisoner in his native language. He asked in Mingrelian if the murderer liked feeling powerless. But Beria did not understand a word and remained silent. Has Lavrenti Beria forgotten his native language? Or was that not him behind the prisoner's box? The latter could explain a lot. Why the process was closed and why photographers were not allowed in. A double prepared in haste could easily be exposed, but the organizers of this show couldn't afford for it to fail. Beria did not know that while he was making plans to become leader of the country, Malenkov and Khrushchev were already preparing a double who was to replace the original at a fake hearing. Because no one was going to judge real Beria, they dealt with him as fast as with Stalin. The murder of Beria was organized like this. The Presidium of the CC was informed that there was data incriminating Beria in the organization of armed conspiracy, armed seizure. They would therefore invite Beria to the Presidium and ask him what was going on. But what if Beria refused to come to the Presidium? Khrushchev offers to send 2 generals to bring Beria to the Presidium. When the generals returned, they said that Beria had resisted and had therefore been killed. They lied and declared that Beria had been arrested and that an investigation was underway, but Beria had been killed. Exactly 6 months later, in the chambers of the Lubyanka, his double was shot. With the official death of Beria began the era of the new masters of the Kremlin. Khrushchev, Brezhnev and Andropov. Who was pounding his desk with a shoe at the UN meeting, threatening the Americans with Kuzkina Mother? Khrushchev or his badly trained double? How had Brezhnev survived 9 attempted murders? Or could it have been the service of the doubles? Who has been appearing before us on TV, welcoming parades and ruling the state? Today, no one can be sure. The documents of that era are still kept in the archives as top secret. And along with them, the sensational facts about our modern history.